everyone. Yes, so welcome to our season's podcast with me, Ruby Elise. And where we want to be at in this season is we are discussing the season that we find ourselves in and our requirement to represent and to voice for you in your season. We are in a season where a generation of mankind are being challenged, right? Where a generation of mankind find themselves questioning one another, what we are at and with the choices that we make on a daily basis. We are at it in a season where we are required to represent us and our opinion, where we find ourselves at in our countries, and what we might be challenged within this season. And therefore, with our discussion, our previous podcast, we have focused on our birthright in season and our right to represent us in season, our right to represent where you find yourself at in your season, and your right to have your opinion be you in your season. We have educated this on our About Fashion page, what where we find ourselves at in our seasons, and what how we represent ourselves in our seasons. And today we want to focus on the you that allow yourself to voice for you in your season. It is an opportunity that we oftentimes neglect, an opportunity that we oftentimes not allow ourselves to represent the you in your season and to represent that you want to voice in your season, right? We have a generation that are requiring us to abide to that. That is someone else's rule, someone else's business, someone else's way of representation, someone else's history book that they are writing. It is someone else's school curriculum that they are preparing. In our generation, find themselves constantly challenged with that is the voice of someone else. And therefore, with today's discussion, we want to have us listen to the voice that is you in your season, your right to represent you, and your opinion you in your season. So when we look at our countries in general during this season, when we find what our countries have themselves be challenged with and what they find themselves challenged with during this season, when we look at a generation that had to prepare for a generation, we question not how our generation find themselves having to work on seasons that is many years from today, on processes that is for generations of people many years from today, and we find ourselves listening to what is it that we are creating for generations many years from today. It is that every part of our generation in the currentness of our day has the right to be here and has the right to be fine with where they are at in their countries and with the choices that they want to make with where they find themselves at in the different seasons in the different countries. And while our generation has learned that our right of representation are sometimes being deprived with someone else that wants to find themselves working on preparing sometimes for wars generation from today, that are preparing sometimes for countries that finds themselves economically wealthy years from today. There's generations of people that find themselves working for households and for family lines that find themselves wealthy and fine years from today. And while many people find themselves in our generation on the working place, we look at a generation that does not only find themselves in the working place, but they find themselves creating an environment where they are sometimes depriving the one the other from where they are required to be at. And while they are working on situations in countries, they find themselves not only working on situations to assist countries out of the poverty state that the world currently finds themselves at, they find themselves working on situations where they are creating situations in countries. So we often look at political leaders that are investing in countries, businesses that find themselves investing in countries where they are not investing to allow countries to be fine in the currentness of our season, and where everyone who finds themselves at in our generation have the right to be fine. We look at political leaders today that work on processes to deprive the one the other and to deprive households today. It is what Rabia Elise and business educates and says it is a process that you call chaotic in a generation. You find yourself in a generation of people that says that they are working towards a vision for themselves, but while they are working on visions for themselves, they are abusing and depriving households and abusing and depriving countries that have the right to be fine with where they are at in the currentness of our season. While we have processes that are so depriving and abusive to humanity, we are required as a generation to allow ourselves to voice for ourselves in a season. It is that we all can say, yea, we agree with that political leaders this season, yea, we agree with what the political leaders are saying today, but it is our right to decide that, you know what, political leaders today are creating environments either to abuse people in our generation or to abuse people in generations to be. The processes in our generations are very not fair. It is very processes that are abusive to certain households, and other households find themselves in the working group today. And while a generation are so much deprived and depressed, we educate the generation through that is abuse, and we allow a generation to be fine. We educate the generation to not be abusing themselves while others are abusive to them, but to educate themselves, and that is a generation that finds themselves fine today. For countries today that find themselves in poverty circumstances, right? In the less advantaged group of our generation, it is easy for those countries today to say they are taking the hand of a political leader or a country that wants to financially support and support them with what they might be challenged with, or there is the opportunity for them to be fine in a season. But when countries today decide to side with political leaders, I always say with a business, you do not vote. You do not side the one with the other. Our generation have the requirement to learn that the completeness of our generation is all the colors of mankind, and all the colors that mankind are required to respond at in any season. And when we represent all the colors, and when the vote business educates a generation on all the colors, I educate our generation on that is the requirement to not just vote for one group or one political party. Your requirement to have learned that the political party is that you choose to lead the country, but in support of the political party we educate on our HR 2023 is we have the assist parties that are assistive to that is the political team that manages the country in general. When we educate our generation on that is a voting poll. We are not only educating the generation to vote nowadays for one country to work with, or one country to have business with, but we educate our generation to deprive the one the other. And when a generation are being educated to deprive the one the other, a generation have to find themselves out of that are the blindness or the oppressiveness in where they find themselves at, having to make a choice to vote, to work with one country. And when they decide to work with one country, they find themselves sometimes challenged with the other country. It is the countries in general, political leaders, the parliamentary house in general, has to find themselves having to make decisions to learn that the world is one house in general, and that the requirement for the world in general to respond to that is that the requirement for the world to look at what is the state of the world today, and to have the world being that is a fine environment for everyone, in that we call a safe haven for everyone, in that we call a place that is fine for everyone, where mankind find themselves on earth, they find themselves everyone's season being fine, and no one feeling challenged when someone making decisions sometimes they're different to your decision in general. And therefore, while we allow ourselves opportunity to voice for ourselves, we listen to that is the decisions that countries are making currently, and how we side with those decisions. You know, it is one thing to say that because your political leader has decided to work with one country, you only find yourself working with one country. And while you are working with one country, vote educates do not oppress the other country. And that is where we say, do not vote the one and the other, because the completeness of all the countries of where mankind find themselves at on earth is the necessity for humanity to allow themselves to be fine with being one human being on earth. With being humanity on earth, with being, someone said, the call it people, with being one people on earth. It is that when you look at the situation of Maui, it is someone sometimes trying to create situations, trying to create news. It is someone sometimes trying to write a story about generation. It is someone sometimes trying to create a book that they leave for generations from today. And while they are trying to create environments, they are abusive, aggressive, they are killing mankind sometimes out because they are creating circumstances that are sometimes abusive and aggressive to humanity. It is that we look at what is happening in our world economically. We look at what is happening in our world environmentally. We look at what is happening in our world technically with the technology, with social media, with the computers that were implemented, with the television programs that finds themselves on the technological side of life. We learn to listen to that we have been educated from in primary school. That is, this is theoretically, this is practically, and our generation has one aspect, and that is the technical part that has been added to a young generation that forms part of the oneness of our generation. It is that the communication and education in our generation is for every country to have the communication, for every country to have what they're required to have. And the processes that were implemented on a technical level were not processes that were only focusing on one country and on certain countries. No, it was technical processes so that every country can have one communication line and can find themselves out of that. And that is the poverty state and the abusive state of our generation. And therefore, while we find ourselves in a season where we have the right to represent us, we listen to that. That is our requirement to respond when we're representing ourselves. It is our requirement to respond to say that a Vogue business educates differently. A Vogue business educates on a vision. A Vogue business educates on an educational leadership requirement. A Vogue business educates on that is relationship. That is the man and woman and the different things that relationships are being challenged with. A Vogue business educates in that. That is not only the spirituality of it, but it is the lifestyle choices today that requires us to not only find our minds today focused on that we used to call the church environment or the religious background of where we grew up at, but there is a completeness of what is required in our generation to educate to one another out of that is going to be abusive. A generation that finds themselves only today wanting to educate on a religious background and on religious foundations are generations today that are really educating themselves to only accept certain colors of mankind, where mankind represents all the colors that our generation in the currentness of the year have been revealed and were revealed to in our seasons. And therefore, with allowing ourselves the completeness to voice you in your season and to represent you, you voice you with what about business educates and our fashion pages. This is Rubia's representation today. This is where Rubia finds herself at in a season today, and this is Rubia's opinion concerning a season today. Today we do not only talk about a season that is a spring season in general, but today we talk about a season that forms part of our reaction, that forms part of how we daily feel, that forms part of what Rubia calls our attitude, our reactions, and our characters, that forms part of our every representation of being human beings on earth. And that is the season of you today. And that is, how is your mood today? How do you physically feel today? How do you mentally feel today? How do you feel with where you are at in your season and with where you are at with your circumstances, in your business, maybe in your household circumstances, in your family circumstances? It is that we call a season of a generation. And while we educate in the current, having to learn that our generation speaks different languages, we allow our generation with the Vogue business to listen to all the different requirements of how a Vogue business explains to the different responses required in our generation. We started last year with our discussions in our podcast where we were focusing on our traditional backgrounds, our religious backgrounds, our different nationalities, our different countries, and the different way that countries are representing themselves. We have educated a generation of leaders and political leaders to accept that there is the completeness of that is the humanity, and that is the people in their country, and that is the house color of their country in general. When we learn to listen to the completeness of the house color in our countries, and as political leaders to listen to the complete house color of how humanity voices and represents themselves, we have the opportunity to educate our generation. We have the advantage, our political leaders have the advantage to manage processes. That is the communication line of humanity. That is the television programs. That is the entertainment industries. That is the radio televisions. That is all the functions that countries can educate on. When countries learn that this is our people in the country, and this is the different opinions, this is the different nationalities that our people are from, and this is the different religious backgrounds that our people have in our countries, this is the different household circumstances, then the only thing we require parliamentary leaders and our political leaders and of the parliament house that manages the country in general is to look at all the colors in a country, to look at all the processes required in a country, and we color our nails for that. I remember going to England in 2014. I've mentioned that before, and my sister took me for a nail job, right? And I did the nail job probably before, and I did the acrylic nails before, and I didn't do it how fashionista would do it. And I remember she took me for a whole makeup and a whole nail session, and I remember choosing my favorite color at that moment. And while she was educating me in a season, without saying it with the words, I have learned that the different colors required in our generation. And I was at that time visiting England, right? And I saw that the England children and the English children have that is the opportunity where they are voicing for themselves, and they are in the essence of coloring in their seasons. And the force of the universe is in that is educating them on the different generations and family lines that they are from. But while they find themselves in a country where there was once that was wars, and that were wars only not because of wars only, but because of apartheid, and because of different religious backgrounds, because of different cultural backgrounds, and they found themselves, the African children, in the European borders, and I had an interest in listening to them while looking at what they are doing, looking at how they express themselves, and listening to that is the everyday child that now learns from themselves, and that now are on a historical education on the European borders of England. And while they were on a historical education, I learned that they sometimes found themselves challenged and addressed with certain circumstances. And I learned that while they are being educated about the requirement for our generation to allow themselves to listen to where they are at, the different colors of mankind, and how mankind are required to be fine amongst one another on earth. They had that is them voicing without saying it with the words, but with what they were dressing, with how they were appearing. They were constantly in an education room in England, and I was in London, right? And they were constantly expressing themselves, and it was amazing. It's like the celebrity house that you look upon, right? And you walk through UK, and you learn that everyone is expressing themselves and is coloring amazingly, and you learn how the force of the universe are educating them about the differences of the different historical backgrounds that everyone is from, but the requirement to learn that all differences are set aside, and everyone is now in one house. And I remember my sister taking me to the nail shop and into the makeup shop, and I was like, no, man, I don't like wearing makeup. And I don't like doing the nails and all of the things that's required. And then she says, but that's sometimes ways of expressing yourself. She didn't say it with the words, but learning with how Antoinette educates, you learn that it is ways of a generation that are expressing themselves sometimes, and that are expressing and explaining sometimes where they find themselves at. And for me, it was challenging sometimes looking at all the nails, and some people's nails were a little bit so long, and then Rabia was so aggressive and saying, but why do we have to say it in this way? And now we've learned that the color of that is the color that our generation are required to accept in a season. It is that we look at the hair weaves that people wear, and we think they're trying to disguise themselves. We think they're trying to say something of themselves that they are not. But we learn it is a way of expressing. It is a way of communicating. It is a way of saying something without saying it in an aggressive or abusive way, the one to the other. It is a way of coloring sometimes, and it is a way where a generation finds themselves and having to find themselves representing and voicing themselves. And therefore, we urge for political leaders to not distress our countries with poverty circumstances based on how our generation expresses themselves. We urge for political leaders to learn to know how to listen to that. That is the communication function of mankind. That is how mankind communicates with one another. That is now not only in the different languages that mankind speaks, but that is now also in the way that mankind in the community expresses themselves. It is that I've learned at New Orleansville Primary School, and that I was a kind, quiet little daughter, right? And I remember when I was out of school and people abused me in class, and then I would find way to, show people that, what, the abuse that happened in class is not allowed because I am listening to the education in season. And I remember how numerous times I had to express myself in ways that I had to be firm in saying that I can be the kindest person in a season, but when I'm required, I can be the most demanding person where I'm required to act to listen to what's required of me in my season. And while I'm required to listen to the education, I don't like myself to be abused while I'm in the same room. I remember numerous times I told in the last who very loud about expressing themselves. And Rabia Elise was very quiet on how I express myself. I have learned to be very quiet on it. And I have learned that the changes in life required me to be a bit loud, to say it a bit harsher, to say it the way that I want to say it, because we are in a generation where no one is making a joke with one another, where people work on processes, where they plan on certain people's lives, where they plan on family lines, where they plan on households, and only because of that, a generation has to learn to express themselves in ways that are sometimes not abusive, but in ways that they are fine with reprimanding when they are feeling abused and oppressed. And that is where a generation allows themselves to voice for themselves in this season. I know a podcast can be very harsh, and we go throw the harsh words in the podcast, and we are loud about it, and there's no, how do you call it? There's no full stop in a podcast, but allow yourself to listen to all that I explain in the completeness of it, because such is the podcast explanation. People say the podcast is the mic. Someone say the podcast means you have to have the headphones on. The podcast is the loudness of your expression without being arrogant, without being rude, with saying what's required, with reprimanding where it's necessary, and with voicing for that is you in your season. And the podcast can sometimes have no full stop on, and Rubia can sometimes talk without having a full stop there, and can only sometimes be the exclamation mark, and that's sometimes where we are at with reprimanding what we are required to be at in our seasons. So don't be confused with the education of what a podcast means, right? It is an opportunity for you to express your opinion in a fine environment, in a fine haven, and an opportunity for you to be non-aggressive when you express your opinion. That's where we find ourselves with podcast education of our generation. I know sometimes some people say, oh, you often find yourself, yes, in the podcast room because you often are expressing yourself so much. And you have to, because if you don't say it to someone today that might find themselves challenged in the country, then that someone might lose out on another day, And our evoke message and motivation is evoke your day, evoke your season, evoke your sun in the day, Evoke that is your opinion and your right to be fine in your day. And how Rabia evoked her season and how she required people to evoke their seasons is to be fine with expressing themselves. When you learn that you can express yourself in a fine environment, when the environment is somewhat challenged, you learn to listen to how are you required to express yourselves. But you don't allow people to oppress you. You don't allow people to silence you out. You don't allow people to quiet your voice out or your opinion out, but you learn to express yourself in that. There is a safe haven, there is a fine environment with where you find yourself at and with what countries are being challenged towards. Another thing I want to discuss quickly is the educational differences, right? The language differences, the different nationalities, and the different religious backgrounds. We have discussed it on our podcast last year. And when you listen to our podcast, you would find reason in listening to where we are at with our House Seasons podcast this year. We started and we explained our generation through the different requirements of us to accept our differences in the completeness of that countries find themselves today, looking at people that are different religious background, looking at people that are different skin color, looking at people that are different traditional background, looking at people that comes from different family household upbringings. In New Zealand today represent exactly that. New Zealand today represent exactly where the sun starts in the morning and where it goes and educates in different countries. And that's where I find myself today, having to have the opportunity to have an opinion on the borders of New Zealand, where the same sun, it's almost like it records what mankind are doing on earth and it educates in countries. And it does the same in the next country, it records what the country are doing and it goes to educate in a different country. And such is the loud might of our generation. It has been hidden for many years that how is it that mankind are learning the one from the different country. It's not only through social media, it is the sun that we are looking at, is that there's a recording function in the universe, and that recording function records the whole country in general, and it goes and it's implemented in a certain country. And that's where Baby Rabia Elise today have the opportunity to represent and to voice my opinion on the borders of New Zealand, where my opinion are sometimes educated in a different country. My lifestyle choices, remember, it's not only your opinion that's educated, it is everything that Rabia do through a day. It is where Rabia finds herself at in her employment. It is where Rabia voices what's about business. It is what Rabia represents when Rabia sometimes go on a Saturday and head out, and then someone else is going to be educated the same of what Rabia has done today. It happens amongst mankind, and that's what Rabia calls all the colors in the room. It is all of the colors of mankind that affects the one the other. And I always say that there's no need for countries to go and kill people out that finds themselves differentiating the one with the other. It is for political leaders to learn to listen to the processes of the universe itself and how humanity are functioning on earth in the completeness of how the universe requires humanity to function on earth. It is there that we say that no one knows his family but the whole humanity, and all humanity on earth are family, and all of the universe are family in the completeness of that. And therefore, when we look at the educational background, the language differences, the different nationalities, the traditional backgrounds, and the religious backgrounds, we look at the requirement to educate in a country like New Zealand, not in an aggressive way, but in a way that is kind, in the calmness of where we find ourselves at. We educate the generation that listens into. This is the education from every team of people that finds themselves having different lifestyle choices in the borders of New Zealand, and that requirement for us to listen to that, and that is our representation of ourselves and how others would then respond with how Rabia responds in a season. And I've learned with that there's been many people that yes have been Googling in on Rabia for many years, and Rabia didn't know it. And it was for management ways of how the world will manage. And some people learned about it. And some people stay tuned into Rabia Elise's upbringing throughout the years. And many people exactly in many countries know my journey. And they can explain it to me on YouTube because they really have been tuned in on our Mama Anna house specifically. And they really find themselves having to also still tune into Rabia Elise, in where Rabia Elise finds herself at in a season. And therefore, when I learned that there's people that has their eyes on me, I had to learn to protect myself. Why? Because I'm now the baby, and the Bible calls it the baby Jesus. And the Bible said that when baby Jesus differentiated with other human beings and with other religious groups and with the same church group that he was in, they find it challenging because his opinion and his ways of explaining himself was so different that they couldn't handle it, because they didn't want to hear that someone else in this world are gonna be different someday. And that is where our generation educates that the universe is their complete colors, but those complete colors can sometimes, be introducing anyone to anyone in this world, and then we don't find ourselves challenged with how people found themselves challenged with Jesus. That was a human being, and that was God explaining it himself to mankind, and mankind found it challenging to listen to that. And that is all the colors in a generation. It is that you don't go and create environments around Rabia saying all the colors, and now you start wars to represent and to say that that's also all the colors. No, you can sometimes explain all the colors in ways that are fine for everyone who finds mankind on the earth, rather than wars created so that the colors can be explained. We know today wars are for different reasons, because countries have found themselves being oppressed and being abused by different countries, and so wars are different punishments for different reasons. But there is ways that political leaders can manage the processes without having to cause wars in countries to want to explain a color to a generation of people. And only therefore our right to represent ourselves in our season is our right to say that this generation of people could have learned about the circumstances of humanity and of what human beings can be challenged with on earth. It could have been explained in a different way, rather than explaining it with wars and killings and all the things that is happening amongst humanity. Could have been explained to our generation in a way that is kind and in a way that is fine with where everyone finds themselves at in our countries. And therefore, when we are educated on the educational level of it, we learn that the educational function of all the colors is that our generation requires to abide to that is right from wrong, and that is what is right from wrong to you in your choices today. And that is when you learn of all the colors and of all the aggressions and of all the arguments in the world today. Are you going to side with one political team, or are you going to decide to be in the educational room of a generation that has learned to choose right from wrong? Right from wrong is we do not deprive the one the other. Right from wrong in our discussions means we do not oppress one the other. We do not abuse one the other. We do not kill the one the other out. We do not harass the one the other's opinion. We do not harass the one with where the other one finds themselves at. I remember having to gone onto a vote page and Malvina them that tried to abuse and silence Rabia Elisa's opinion out, because Malvina thought that Rabia's opinion were based on where Malvina found herself at in a season. And Rabia had to be firm in saying that our right to represent ourselves and to be direct with who we are communicating in season is where the whole world don't go and fight a generation of people that the one business is called Aisha and the other business are called the Vogue today, and where generation of people have to choose sides. No, people listen to whoever they want to listen to, but people do not deprive the other one's opinion. And that is what Rabia Elise has been firm on, that no one goes to look for the Aisha business that is explaining something different in a Vogue business, but they go and listen when they want to listen in that room. And the Rabia's opinion in a Vogue business and in her season with representing opinion is where Rabia started her business in 2017, right on Purpose Serving page on my Facebook page, where I started to motivate and where I started to inspire, and where I started to really voice that is me in my season, and that is also me in my season all over the place. This is also me. So be fine with me, but the all over the placeness also in sometimes, And when I learned that I was starting my business with Purpose Serving right in 2017 on my Facebook page, and Awoke Business, Awoken Purpose represented the purpose room at that time, and the educational requirement of Rabia Elise to really tell a story to people who's really listening into her and who goes to manipulate what she's doing, and then she has an opinion to say that, you know what, when you see Rabia do this, don't go and do the wrong about it, but I choose to decide what is fine for you with what Rabia is educating in a season. And that is sometimes how we have to allow ourselves to represent where we find ourselves at in our season. How Rabia Elise have decided to allow myself with where I have started my business and are owning that is my awokenness within my season, and there is me that behind myself explaining that is my purpose and that is my responsibility to myself, right? Purpose means to Rabia Elise and to Awoke Business a responsibility to herself. It is my responsibility to own that is me, the awokenness of my season, and to express that in the way that is fine for me. And therefore, in my season of having to introduce my business, I found my business challenged, right? And that's business owners today on social media. They're constantly competing and constantly silencing one another out. But it is that we have to learn to allow ourselves to block people out if they are depriving and oppressive to you, and to allow yourself to express your opinion and to represent your purpose in expressing yourself in where you find yourself at in your season, in representing that are you in your season. Allow yourself to voice you. It is an amazing thing to do that, and we don't have to do it with aggression. I sometimes do it with reprimanding. Yes, when I learn that other business owners are trying to quiet me, and they sometimes don't only try to quiet people, they try to kill people out, because that's what business people in this world do today. But we have to educate the world of business people that the world is not there for business owners to go and kill one another out. The world is there for business owners to learn that we all have our ways and requirements to lead a generation, and whoever finds themselves in the way of Rabia Elise are going to find themselves challenging themselves, because where Rabia Elise find herself at in a season, my direction, my education, my upbringing, my opinion on myself is the firmness of that I find myself in, that I'm direct with where I'm at. And I say it the way I say. People say, don't mention people's names. And Rabia says, when you are direct, then you don't have to go and kill the whole world out. You don't have to kill a Malvina out, but a Malvina can listen to that sees sometimes maybe saying it without saying it, and she can listen to Rabia's opinion about it, because such is the world today. The world look at different business owners and they decide to vote and to favor the one the other, and then Rabia finds herself challenged with where she's at in her season, and only therefore we have a right to allow ourselves to voice ourselves in our season, and we need to be direct about that, because that's a requirement, a generation with so much different colors and with so much different opinions. And what we are concluding today with our podcast is, we had sunny day and we had the amazing weather of the spring season, is that in the completeness of our language differences, in the completeness of our right from wrongs educational backgrounds, in the completeness of our different nationalities that speaks and represents in different houses and different parts of the earth, we have the completeness of listening to the different religious backgrounds. That is now not only today the Muslim and the Christian, but that is now the Muslim educates his education to the world, and the Christian has a right to educate their education. The Jewish people have their education to humanity, and they have a right to listen to the education that is the Hebrew person, and that is the Hinduism person. That is the completeness of the force of the universe that parents mankind in how mankind are required to be parent. And what we want political leaders to learn today is that all our communication backgrounds that we have, and that parliamentary leaders have to educate on television stations, to educate on social media pages, to educate in the education function our generation, to accept that is the completeness of how humanity colors and how they educate and how they represent themselves in season. It is that we have that requirement for all the countries to abide to that is educate the complete colors without aggressing the viewers, without aggressing the people that listen into the radio station, and without aggressing one another in the country. It is learn to know how to educate the completeness of colors through the television entertainment teams, through entertainment in our countries, through implementing processes that is fine for everyone in our countries that are from different traditional and different religious backgrounds, that are expressing themselves and that have the right to express themselves in countries. It is that we learned that there was never a wrong between Muslim and Christian. There was never a wrong between Hinduism and between Hinduism and Judaism. There was never a wrong between the different religious backgrounds, but each religious background educates us something different in the completeness of the universe, and we are required to allow and appreciate every function in where they find themselves at educating a generation. In that is the education room and all the colors of a generation. I know I said a lot, I know I spoke a lot, but we're going to talk a bit more next week and next week's session on the educational backgrounds, language differences, the traditional way differences, the religious differences, And the only thing we want our generation to listen to and to follow in season and with our podcast is learn to follow that. That is, everyone is going to represent different, everyone is going to express themselves different, everyone is going to say different, everyone has been brought up differently. But what can our educators in the room do? That is today the parliamentary leaders, that is today the teams that manages television, that manages radios, that manages entertainment functions in the countries, that manages restaurants and businesses. What can they do today is they can learn to educate the color and the completeness of the requirement to accept the complete color in a generation can today be educated from the parliamentary house, rather than the parliamentary house finding every education challenging to themselves. You know, if you're a parliamentary leader and you find yourself in the apartheidness of the mindset, then you still have to be educated, because in New Zealand today, New Zealand finds themselves different nationalities, different countries. There's Muslims, there's Hinduisms, there's Iranians, there's Iraqis, there's Indians, there's the whole people, and then there's the native people, there's the Maori people, and we're all in one education room under the amazing sun that shines upon us. And thank the Almighty for that, yes, for the amazingness of the education room that is one in this country. But we have to learn that the New Zealand Parliamentary House cannot be one-sided, because humanity is here to educate, to learn, to voice opinions. And you know, the team in New Zealand is not aggressive, other than how processes should be managed in a way that are non-aggressive to the team of people that finds themselves in New Zealand. Yes, there's LGBT people, yes, there's a whole team of people, there's your mamas, there's your whole different teams of people in New Zealand, and it's an amazing education season, and Rabia is enjoying listening in onto it. And sometimes I find it a little bit depressing and depriving, and then I switch television off, or then I don't listen to it, and other times I go out and I go and explore, and everyone educates and colors differently in New Zealand. The only thing we require our parliamentary leaders to do is to listen to what's happening, and to don't abuse the teams that are educating and that are voicing, and to don't allow anyone to abuse one another, because the house is one color. It's all the amazing different colors in the house and educations in the house, and the force of the universe I mentioned before has brought us all to the borders of New Zealand to represent and to voice our opinions and to express ourselves without being oppressed and without abusing one another. So while we are at that, we require the parliamentary house to abide to that. There is one house education is amazing, and it is mankind on earth that are expressing the completeness of every representation that they are required to represent, with representing themselves in their seasons. That is it for today, everyone. Have an amazing podcast season with our seasons with Rabia Elise.